Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. In this episode, we'll be listening to Understanding Event ROI with Professional Booksellers School that was presented at Children's Institute 2026 in Schaumburg, Illinois.
Good morning. Thank you guys so much for being here. We're going to start with our housekeeping, which I assume by now you guys are very familiar with. So there's QR code for slides and handouts. There is a handout, and I highly recommend downloading it. It's really useful. I made it. Please tell me how I did in the survey. ABA will give me feedback, and also in general, it's just really helpful for developing all of the incredible curriculum. Recordings will be on BookWeb. Please silence your phones, etc. Hopefully we will have time for questions. I'm going to talk pretty fast, so we should. But please wait for the mic so that it can be captured for lots of different reasons, but those include accessibility and for the recording. All right, you know the deal. Don't collude. So want to share ideas and support, but don't discuss pricing policies, boycotts, dividing up the market. Talk to ABA if you have further questions. Okay, hi. Welcome. My name is Molly Olivo, and I'm here on behalf of the Professional Booksellers School. I was an indie book buyer and event coordinator for 15 years, and I now teach for the Professional Booksellers School, and I'm also the Key Accounts and Education Sales Manager at Barefoot Books. So come and see me at Meet the Presses later if you want to chit-chat. The Professional Booksellers School was established in 2020 to address the unmet need for sustained professional development for bookstore owners and staff. So we are very excited to be here, and we are here to help. If you have sort of big picture, you need to develop some systems things, come talk to me about PBS. So today we are going to talk about understanding event ROI and also looking at sort of capacity for growth as well. So ROI, event data, and data analysis, which I promise is not the worst thing in the world. I feel like booksellers often get a little stressed out when I start talking about data, but I promise we're making friends with our data today. Okay, so by the end of this session, we want you to be able to understand the different types of event income and costs. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking to you about your staff costs. Prepare yourselves. You're going to learn how to calculate the ROI for an event, how to look at ROI and other data to gauge success, and also to analyze things in order to make changes and improvements. Okay, so what is ROI? So ROI stands for return on investment. Why are we talking about investments? Because we need to understand the costs going into and the money coming out of our events in order to understand the overall health of our event programs. This calculation only works for giving you a financial ROI, which we know is not always the complete picture. I promise we love you, mission-driven stores, but it's a really great place to start. I wanted to start with ROI because it is consistent across stores and events and vital to measuring your program's current capacity. Even if profit is not your goal with your events program, costs will impact your capacity. So creating event ROIs is one easy way to start making decisions about which events are working for your store, which you need to drop, and what elements your more successful events have in common. Okay, so understanding your event income. So we're going to start with sales from the featured book. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. How much money did you make off of the book that you're featuring? You should also be looking at sales of backlist titles of the same author or that are connected to the event. Your sales from tickets. This is basically any ticket income that isn't the cost of the book. So if it's a bundle thing where it's a $35 ticket, but the book is $25, $10 of that is your ticket income. Your sales from sidelines. If you have specific sidelines you're selling during that event or that are featured, include that income here. And then extra sales during the event time. This is harder sometimes. If attendees are making other purchases in the store during the event, you're going to be recording those sales as well, and that counts as event income. if you want to get really into the weeds in this, if you're doing events during your open hours, you want to compare the sales during the event period to what your average sales are during that same time period. And extra sales would be allocated to the event, and the average sales would go just towards your day-to-day. I highly recommend doing this because sometimes you'll notice that your sales are lower when you do events during store hours. You could have been making more money just being open. But not always. So the total for all of these items is your gross income for the event. And now we're going to talk costs. Okay. So the cost of goods sold for the featured books and backlist. We are only talking about the books that you sell. We are assuming that you're ordering returnable for your events. If you're not, then you have to calculate this slightly differently. Come talk to me after if you want to chat about how to do that. Your margins for sidelines might be different, but you need to include the costs for everything that you sold. So people always forget this and they'll be like, wow, I had such a great ROI, but they forgot to account for the fact that they bought the items they sold. So don't get inaccurate answers, include your costs. Material costs. So knowing the cost of the supplies that you needed for the event. If this is like a paint and sip, it can be actually pretty high. You need to buy canvases and paint and easels and everything else. If it's a regular author signing, Post-its do cost money, and that adds up. So keep track of it. Sharpies, those count. The chairs that you use for your events also cost you money. So you want to account for that on some level. Advertising and promotion costs. Rental costs. I think if you are renting a venue, you also need to account for how much it costs to rent the place. Advertising and promotion costs, those are also pretty self-explanatory. If you're doing Facebook ads or something, that costs you money. Printing things costs money, et cetera. All of that is accounted for. Staff time, I'm going to talk about this more in a minute, but staff time is a real cost on a ton of levels. Do not undervalue your staff time. Track it. Food. I know I've worked with quite a few stores that always do food at their events, and it turns out that that's eating up a ton of their potential profit. So just tracking how much you're actually spending on foods and drinks and things is worth it. And then return shipping. Is anyone here perfect and has never over-ordered for an event? Okay. I just wanted to double check. I'm assuming there's a unicorn somewhere in the book selling world that has never over-ordered. But for the rest of us, you're going to over-order. It's a fact of life. Sometimes it rains during the event, or it's too nice outside and nobody shows up. Whatever happens, you can't predict everything. So you need to be accounting for return costs to the publisher. The total of all of these costs is your event's total cost. Okay, this is my soapbox and I will stand on it for the rest of time, okay? It is 100% absolutely necessary to understand how many staff hours, how much payroll an event takes. It is integral to getting an accurate ROI and also just for understanding how much you are investing in individual events. And yes, the cost of staff time includes all staff hours, not just during the event, planning the event too. Even if you are the owner and you're not currently paying yourself, or you're doing it at 11 o'clock at night on a Thursday, those hours count. If you are the manager and you work full time and this isn't done during your in-store time, it still counts. Document it. Keep track of how many hours are being spent and how much that is costing. This includes planning and executing the event, everyone involved. In the context of children's books, I think we are often used to doing a lot of unpaid labor, but when you are planning for increasing capacity and growth, you need to understand how many hours things take, because what if you want to hire someone to do this job? And in your head, it doesn't take that many hours because you're doing this at 11 o'clock at night and you don't realize that you spent 42 hours planning one event. You need to understand what the actual demand is that you have. So, can you tell I get a lot of pushback on this every time I teach it? If you were paying someone, how much would it cost? Hourly. So keep track of it every single time. You need to understand the full cost of doing events to plan for the future. If your program grows, you need to hire someone. You need to be able to give them a realistic idea of how many hours it should take to do things. You also need to make sure that you're not burning out your staff, giving them an unrealistic workload, and not having enough support. All of that stuff is really important for the health of your business. So please, if you take nothing else from today, this is it. Track the hours that your staff is spending on events. Okay, so calculating your ROI. So you are going to determine your net profit first, your net income. Add up your gross income, and then you're going to add up your total costs, which we just talked about what those include. Subtract the costs from the gross income, and that amount is your net income. The number can and sometimes will be negative. Remember, having a negative net income is a measurement, not a value judgment. Take a deep breath if it comes out negative. I promise it's not the end of the world. It'll happen sometimes. Okay. Second, you're going to determine your ROI. This is a percentage that shows how much money you made in relation to what you spent. So in order to determine your ROI, you're going to use the numbers from the net income calculation. Divide your net income by your total costs, then multiply that number by 100. This will give you a percentage such as 10%, 50%, 400%, not very common in the book industry, I'll be honest. Sometimes negative 12. It can be lots of different things. So what does that mean? The ROI is going to tell you how much your investment has yielded. So if you spend $600 and you make $1,000, your calculation would look like $1,000 in sales minus $600 in costs is $400 net profit, divided by $600 in costs is 0.667, and multiplied by 100 is 67%. That means that for every $1 you invested in that event, you made an additional 67 cents, which in the book industry is like a pretty big win. Honestly, it is very hard to get a margin above 50%. For book-based events, at least. So you will not often have a super high ROI depending on the model that you're using. And it's important to note that any positive ROI can be considered good. You are the one measuring this success and deciding what that looks like. I use ROI to compare events to see how much our investment in different events are working out, not individually to decide whether or not I did good enough. It is a great place to start and a calculation that can help you get used to playing nice with your data. This is not the be all and end all. Okay, so we're going to do some of these together. How many people are feeling really stressed out about numbers right now? Anybody? Okay, totally reasonable. If you're stressed out about numbers, I promise I will not call on anyone in this situation, but if you want to shout out some answers, feel free or talk through it. So, all right, for this situation, the sales were $1,000. We're starting pretty even here. That's the total event sales for everything. The costs were $600, which was the cost of the books we sold, $150 in staff time, which is 10 hours at $15 an hour. $20 in return shipping, and $10 for Sharpies and bottled water for the author. They were very thirsty. So our total costs, we're going to add up here, come to $780. And then if you subtract that $780 from the $1,000 we made, we had $220 in net income. So on top of what we spent, we made $220. So that comes out to a 28% return on investment. So this means that for every $1 I spent on this fictional event, we generated 28 cents on top of that. This might not be the number you want to see, but it is a positive number, and that in and of itself is a good sign. Bookselling is a low margin industry, so making even a low profit is normal and a positive sign. Context is everything. This should be looked at in comparison with other events and other efforts the store has going on, as well as your mission and lots of other things. Okay, and here's my typo on the slide. it's supposed to be 140 copies at $30. That's why the math doesn't work. If anyone in here likes math, I know it's wrong. I'm sorry. Okay. So for this example, so we've got 140 copies of a $30 book comes to $4,200, $1,000 in sidelines. So total sales, gross income, $5,200. So books and sidelines often have drastically different discounts. So the books were bought at a 40% discount from a certain distributor. So we're going to multiply 4,200 by 0.6. So 60% is how much we paid for the books. So the cost of goods sold for the books is $2,520. The sidelines were bought at a 55% discount. So we're going to multiply $1,000 by 0.45, 45%, which means the cost of goods sold for the sidelines is $450. All right. Are we with me? Good. Awesome. Okay. And then staff time, we paid $19.50 an hour for 5 hours each for 3 staff members. One of those people was planning for 5 hours and the other 2 were executing the event. So the staff time came out to $292.50. $25 worth of Post-its and Sharpies. I don't know what we were doing with all of those, but it's fine. And the returns ended up costing about $25. So our total costs, $3,312.50. And we know that our total gross sales were $5,200. So when we're calculating our ROI, we are going to say net profit divided by total cost times 100. And that is going to come out to 57%, which is actually pretty great. Okay. So now we're going to look. So this is a rather squished spreadsheet. The handout has this information. So this is the way that I like to look at ROI. I don't like to look at it on its own because it stresses me out. I like to compare it and say what was good, what was bad, what was hard, and then look at what's going on. So for example, we've got a book fair, a story time, a costume character, and an in-store YA author event. If you go all the way down to the bottom, you can see the ROIs for each of them. You'll notice none of them are above 10%. Just these are based on real events that people did. So just keep that in mind. So the YA author event had a negative ROI. The most positive ROI was, in fact, the book fair at a private preschool. If you've never been to one of my sessions about preschool book fairs, let's chat. And costume character events, because these can have a lot of sidelines. That one also has a nice little slightly higher ROI. When you're looking at these things, you want to look at what's doing well and then think about why it might be doing better. So we are going to dig in a little further here. I wanted to make sure that we were giving you an ROI that has did not go as well, because I think sometimes you can look at these and go, everyone's ROI is 78% or something. That is not particularly common in the book industry, particularly in kids' books, because we're dealing with lower price points for the books. So if your total income was $0, nobody bought any books. They did spend $100 on sidelines while in the store, so that was something. Costs were $45 for the sidelines, 3 staffers, $19.50 an hour for 5 hours. Wait, that math doesn't work out. Apparently we're paying them $15 an hour, on the slide. Sorry. And then craft supplies were $53, bringing our total cost to $278. If we determine the ROI for this, we have our net income was negative $178, making the ROI for this negative 64%. Now, just to keep this in perspective, you lost less than $200 on this event, negative 64% of Just deep breaths if that comes out as your number. So this means that for every dollar you invested, you lost 64 cents. So not the best outcome. Nobody's looking for negative ROIs on events, but this event could have met a million other things. You could have added 500 people to your mailing list. You could have gotten great exposure for the store. You could have made an important partner. There are lots of other things that could have made this event worthwhile. So do not look at the ROI in a vacuum. Oh, good. Sorry. Don't look at that. Okay. So, sorry. Once you've collected some event data, and I'm talking the sales data, attendance numbers, social media, all of the things that you want to look at. I also highly recommend tracking the day of the week and the weather for your events because you can get a lot of perspective out of that. You need to analyze that data. Collecting all of it means nothing if you don't do anything with it. So it's not there to make you feel weird about your program, but to help inform your decisions moving forward. We are not looking back and judging our past choices. We are looking forward and making better ones every day. So the spreadsheet that we shared includes a way to track the data needed for an ROI, as well as some basic data about your event program and store. I highly recommend you fill that in and start working with it. It actually helps a lot to sort of get into the habit. We call this your event capacity data in the PBS course, but for this session, it's going to be your data ready for analysis. So once you know your ROIs, the number of seats that you have available in all of your venues, how many people can fit standing in your space before you start getting in trouble, your current outreach via all of your social media outlets, you can begin to answer the big questions. Why are some of my current events working well by my measures? What patterns do I see? Having measured which events are and aren't working, what conclusions can you draw? Why are some of these underperforming? How did you get that from the data to your conclusions? You do not want to just decide that this is what happened. You want to have something to back it up. What can you extrapolate from your data and analysis about ways to change how you choose, market, and produce events to move towards your desired outcomes? In the PBS course, we often say this is when you start to realize what you should have said no to and what you should say no to going forward. Having the capacity to do things well is more important than having a maximum number of events. And now we're going to talk about comparing to your mission. So a great way to understand or to start to understand how your events are working is to analyze how they align to your mission. So first, you're going to look at some events that you consider most successful and least successful, considering both ROI or other goals. Again, you are in charge here. You can decide what's important to you. Ask how well they fit into your store's mission. Are they mission-oriented, mission-enabling? Those are the ones that make money so you can do mission-related things. I love them. Understanding the fit or mismatch not only shows you if your event program fits with your mission, but also with how your store's mission fits into your community's interests or how well that mission is being understood by your community. If your most successful events don't fit your mission, consider whether you're not reaching the audience you thought you were targeting, or if your community shares the same values, I'm sure it does, or has the same interests expressed through the events. I'm sure they have the same values and everything, but there might be some barrier between your store's image and their internal mission statement. So this is a great place to sort of dig deep. Are you saying what you think you're saying? Particularly with your event program, but it does translate to your larger store mission. Are all of your most successful events based around a cause that is important to your customers, but not yet in your mission statement? Does that mission need to be revised to account for this? Or do you need new customers? Do your customers spend more per transaction during mission-focused events? To answer this question, you'll need to keep records from your point of sale system for a cross-section of your events. As always, remember to ask yourself, what data am I using to back myself up? I love making wild assumptions about what is working and what isn't, but you have to be able to go back and say, like, what in my data is backing this up always. Often stores have really noble missions like increase the love of reading. Love that. The problem with these is that they are not measurable. What number can you measure if you've increased love of reading? Are you measuring a before and an after that you can compare? You have to be able to track your goals. There is a big thing in sort of like goal-based things, very corporate. It's called SMART goals, but being measurable is the thing that we often find is the most difficult in bookselling land because we have these lofty ideas, but they're often things that are hard to quantify. You need to find things that you can measure. And they can be associated with those lofty goals. You just have to be able to actually measure them. So as you gather the data to understand how much you're spending on events, how much your events are bringing in, and which of your goals the events are meeting, you are prepared to take the next step and consider if and how your program can strengthen and or grow. With the data in front of you, you're going to begin asking, is your program meeting the needs of your community? Should you consider a different balance of profit-driven events versus mission-driven events? Can we expand this program now or later? Should we? Do we want to? If so, what is our staff's event capacity? Are they doing things really well right now, but looking a little bit haggard after every single event? Has anyone been there? I feel like 2021, that was my life. Every event felt like we were struggling for weeks afterward, but the events went well, so was it fine? Can they do more, or can we afford to hire more help? Are your events producing enough profit that you can expend more resources on them? I want you to also ask, is it possible that this is not the time to try to expand, but rather to refocus to better fit your definition of success? What data are you using to get here and why? Does anyone feel like they're doing too many events? Can you just raise your hands? All right, great. I love it. Usually people are like, we're not doing enough. Anyone feel like they're not doing enough events? They need to do more. Okay, great. Ooh, this is the opposite of what that normally shakes out to be. This is one of those situations where we again go back to this question of what should I be saying no to? Like, there's a wonderful children's bookstore that says yes to everything, or used to. Actually, they took the PBS course and we spent a lot of time with them being like, you're allowed to say no. The publishers will not put you on some sort of like never work with again if you say no to an event. But they were in a neighborhood that was like not a Christmas neighborhood. Okay. But this author came in and was like, oh, I love your bookstore. I'd love to do this event for my Christmas book. They host the event. Very few people show up. A lot of their community was rather confused. They were a radical feminist bookstore for children, and having a like rather religious Christmas book event felt a little off brand for them. So not only did they do an event that nobody showed up to, they also did an event where that confused their community and muddled the identity of the store. So you want to think about how things fit in to your program. You want to know who you are and why. So make sure you are backing all these things up with data. And it does not all have to be hard data. It can be like, we're in book selling. We love a story. Anecdotal data counts, at least in my book. Don't tell the like econ majors. So as you gather data, you should also be looking hard at the input from event staff or your general staff to shape your growth analysis. You might be seeing the numbers and thinking, we are kicking so much butt. We're planning all these events with minimal staff time and people are showing up. This is great. Time to expand. We're ready. We've got some space for a little bit more payroll. We'll figure it out. But if your staff are running on fumes and feeling overwhelmed by the workload, even if they are doing it really well and you're not noticing quite how burnt out they are on a daily basis, it might be too much to expand. You may need to hire more staff to cover what you're currently doing, or you may need to step back a little bit and ask them what they actually need. Mental health matters in a post-2020 world. I think we all have recognized this more than in the past, but even if you don't have a good way to account for it in the data, you need to have that information, and your staff can tell you, and hopefully that you are cultivating sort of the type of environment where people feel comfortable. You don't have to ask them, like, tell me everything about your mental health. Have you had to up your dosage recently? But I do think that being able to go in and say, so how are things going? Are people feeling overwhelmed? Like, you should be able to have those conversations, and not just when a problem comes up. You want to be having these conversations early and often. All right. And then so this is not my part of this class, but ABCD, always back up conclusions with data. Ideally, the data comes first, but we all tailor things to fit our narrative a little bit. So please track your data, particularly your staff hours for events, but everything as well. All right. And that is here. Oh, yes. We've got so much time for Q&A. So Mike is coming around. Does anyone have questions?
I have a question. I fully believe in tracking all the time, even the 11 o'clock emails. But how? Have you come up with a system? Because I feel like sometimes I'm forgetting those it's like a 10-minute email here or there in the middle of a day. And I feel like most of my job in planning events is emailing. And how do I figure out that kind of time?
Absolutely. It is impossible to do perfectly. I traditionally have used a little time tracker on my phone. There are quite a few different ones. The one I used to use, they now make you pay for, and it's literally like a stopwatch that I don't think it's really worth paying for. So I won't recommend that one, but there are a bunch of time management apps that you can use, and just start it when you start working on it. Stop it when you stop. I know that takes an extra 15 seconds for every individual email. Once you have enough of that data, you can start to say, like, okay, there were 20 emails today. Each of them took me 3 minutes. It was 60 minutes. It was 1 hour. That's how much time I spent on that. If you forget, just make an estimate. We're not doing this to be sort of like perfect data trackers. We're doing it to get a really good idea of how much time it takes. And we know that a lot of this is happening like on the sales floor, and you're being interrupted 5 times by a kid asking you, like, where I don't know, like, it's been a while since I've been a Booksellers. Warriors still a thing. Like, I need book 5 in the 4th Warriors series. Rainbow Magic's back. Do you have Ruby the Red Fairy? So all of that kind of stuff you're never going to be able to get a perfect answer to that unless you're the one event manager who's only doing event management and never touches anything else, but is the best guesstimates you can do are good enough. Questions?
Hello. I was hoping you could talk a little bit more about calculating the supply costs for events, because we do a lot of events, and our supplies manager typically just orders Post-its and Sharpies and stuff when I need it. There's not typically a specific event that I'm attributing to it. So do you kind of trickle the costs into the next few, or is there a way that you're balancing like general supply costs of stuff that's regularly coming in rather of stuff you're ordering specifically for events?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm insane, and I do this in the most in-depth way because I'm nuts. But there are 2 ways that people tend to do it. You can either just allocate it to the event where they were received. So like if you had to buy new Post-it notes before you hosted Jarrett Lerner, then Jarrett Lerner is getting credit for the costs of those. I do it in a way where I spread it over so things like Post-its, I do it similar to cost of goods sold, where it's like if I use 3 things of Post-its, then I add up the cost of 3 things of Post-its. 5 Sharpies, it's the cost of 5 Sharpies. I break down the cost of chairs by the number of so let's say you have 100 chairs and they should last you 3 years. Okay. Hopefully they last longer than that, but people are insane and do weird things in chairs. So let's say you do 50 events a year for 3 years. That's 150 events. So you divide the cost of the chair by 150. That is the cost of the chair for each of those individual events. Which is the crazy person way to do that. You don't have to be that exact. I have a sort of like per attendee, how much I think the general cost of the event. So that's like a portion of the AV equipment, a portion of the chair costs, a portion of what I call the opportunity cost, which is just $1 per person, in my opinion. Depends on your store and how much of the store is being taken up by the event, but that can vary pretty wildly. And I just add that on to the costs for every event. But I think, again, you do not have to get perfect data in order to have useful data. So I'd say sort of, do it in a way that works for you and you will actually do, because no one other than me is doing the thing with the chairs. That's crazy. Yeah.
How do you track or quantify the slightly less tangible benefits? Meaning, we only had 4 people come to the event, but 2 of them are new customers. Or a week later, we get an increase of, 3 additional newsletter subscribers, or something like that. Like we know in our gut that it's an outcome of the event, but how do you quantify that when you're putting all the data together?
So if you take the event management course with Professional Booksellers School, I'm happy to go into a lot of detail on this with you. We call it the magic metric, but basically you're going to assign a point value to things that matter to you. So for example, new customers coming into the store, you may have points. Let's say you've got like 6 criteria. One of them was the ROI positive? You get 10 points if it was, negative 10 points if it wasn't. If one of your goals is getting new people in the store, you might give yourself 20 points for every new customer that came to the event, or 5 points for every new newsletter subscriber. Whatever it is that you're looking for, you're going to assign point values. These points mean nothing outside of the context of your goals. So it is only going to matter in the context of comparing different events to each other and aligning those events with your goals. So in the case you're talking about, you've got 4 people, but 2 of them are new. If getting new people in the door is a goal, maybe make that it's worth 20 points. And then you're going to add up the points for each of your events at the end of the event. Once you've tracked all that information, I only allow tracking from a week before the event to a week and a half after the event for sales and for things like being added to the newsletter. Because I think if it's after that, it's a little too murky to assign it value. But then you can compare events to each other. So these points mean nothing on their own. One event could just have, 250 points and you have no idea what that means. But if you do it for a large group of events, you'll start to see certain events that have sort of risen to the top as your best performers and other events that are significantly lower. And that should give you these are the things that are meeting our goals and these are the things that are really not. Good answer. And I'm happy to talk about that in more depth individually if you want. Okay.
I'm not sure if anybody else does this, but I always included the signed copies sold in the week plus after, sometimes even 2 weeks. But as long as we were advertising it, we would get online orders for that. And then obviously the people who stumble in and say like, how'd you get signed copies of it? Right. Because of course they weren't paying attention. But like, do you include that as your event sales total, or do you have that as a separate thing?
I do. I highly recommend doing that. And the publicists, if you have like an author coming in, they will appreciate you doing that because the residual sales are still sales for the event. I want you to set a time limit for yourself though, because you want to be measuring it consistently. So if like one event, you're giving it credit for how many copies of that book you sold for 2 months afterward, but for another, it's only for a week, then you're not getting consistent data. So set yourself parameters. Mine is a week before to a week and a half after. That was totally arbitrary. I chose it during one event and then decided I had to be consistent for the rest of time about it. But I think whatever your community tends to, I don't know, I'm in DC. We don't have particularly good memories past a week and a half. So I figure if it's after that, they probably just saw the book and wanted it. But if you have a community that has a little bit more of an attention span, then you can probably push it to 2 weeks. Absolutely.
Sorry, I just wanted to return back to calculating costs. I noticed on one of the slides that for the event where no books were sold, you didn't calculate the cost of return or books into the total cost. Is that, and obviously it's because no books were sold, but I guess I'm a little confused because that still seems like a cost that you made that would be toward the event because you would be returning those books.
Yeah. So if you were doing an author event that nobody showed up to, where you ordered books just for the event, then you would definitely need to calculate in returns. And that, I made up that event, and well, it's sort of loosely based on a community-based event, but we were using like regular, like books that came off of the shelf and we were going to put back on the shelf for it. So nothing got returned in that scenario, but you would definitely, if you needed to return anything, you would definitely want to calculate in those costs as well.
Hi, thank you for this. Question, do you have any tips or tricks for how we can have our staff or our events team, because I have like a larger events team working my events across my stores, to track this data and do it quickly and efficiently so that way I'm not going into every event afterwards?
Yes. That can often be a struggle, especially if you have several different people working on different pieces of an event. I love a Google form. I set them up with all of the like, we need this data the night of the event questions, and have whoever was working the event fill them out. It is part of the shift. It's, like on the checklist. I love a checklist. They are required to do that before leaving that night. For tracking time, it's harder for people to do that consistently. So I tend to sort of give a little more grace on that side of things, but I do require people to give me like an estimate. And for the execution of the event, generally, like it's a little easier. Like the event was 2 hours, plus you had 30 minutes for setup and 30 minutes for cleanup and 5 minutes to fill out my Google form. But for the planning part, especially if you have a larger staff, it can be harder to get them in. But I think having a clear idea of who's in charge of the planning so that it's, one person's time or two people's time per event can be really useful depending on how your team is structured. But I would say just sort of, do the best you can. Again, we're not an industry where we're going to be able to get like the cleanest, perfect data. at least not most of the time. And if someone has figured that out, please come tell me about it. I would love to hear. But I think it's sort of having people collect as much data and record it immediately. That tends to be the best way to get the most accurate data. Any other questions? Yeah.
What would you recommend doing for like a little bit more like vague events or like longer events? So we're doing a summer reading bingo. So obviously most of the sales are just some people coming in, some people buying for the bingo. Like what would you look at for that?
I really like tracking codes for things like that. So if there's a way in your point of sale system to allocate those sales to that program, then you can pull reports that will give you sales data. The system I worked with in the bookstore I worked at was like incredibly archaic. It was one of those where you're using a lot of function keys. And I did a discount code for 0%. So that I would pull reports for the discount code, and it would give me everything that was allocated for that event. Depending on how you want to track things, you could also do like if they're turning in like a bingo card or book reviews, that kind of thing, you can give a certain, like you can allocate a certain dollar amount or point value to each of the things turned in. You can track it a lot of different ways, but I think start with what your goals are for the program and start tracking whatever will get you the most information about whether or not it met that goal. So if the goal is sales over the summer, you need to find a way to track the sales. If the goal is engaging kids in reading activities, then you want to be tracking how many kids are participating in those activities first. I mean, hopefully you can find a way to track all of that, but and pre-sales should always have a trackable code. Just it will make your life so much easier. Any other questions? Magically answered them all and finished early. Oh, good.
I'm curious of what your answer is. I think I might know what it is, but we do a lot of events that are supply heavy. Like we are a book and plant store. So we do like plant classes, we do puzzle competitions, mahjong classes. And so our ticket price like creeps up there really quickly. And I'm like, oh man, the common person is not going to pay for this. And so then I feel like I have to start compromising the ticket price because it's so expensive in hopes that sales make up for it. Have you ever come across that?
Yes, often. I think this is the kind of thing where you ultimately, it's about what the goal is, right? And I feel like a broken record. I say this so many times, but it's, why are you doing the event? If the goal is to make money from the event, your ticket price should be covering your costs easily. I would also recommend looking at what the costs are for events, particularly kids events. People pay really good money to entertain their kids. Like my son's summer camp is $900 a week, and I hate every single time I have to pay for it. And just think about and it's like 9 to 3. Like it is not enough time to really make that a reasonable price. So I think often I think this comes back to the patriarchy or something. And it's women's work being undervalued, but your time is worth something. The effort you're putting into these events is creating an incredible atmosphere for the people coming. It is likely that whatever price you needed to charge is fine. The cost of things are higher than they used to be. I do recommend trying to establish relationships with wholesalers that specialize in the types of supplies that you might need. If you're doing a lot of events that are art related, get a wholesale art supplier. If you're doing mahjong, find someone that sells mahjong sets or like contract it out. And I would honestly like, people pay a lot of money to learn how to play mahjong. I am sure they will pay an extra $5 so that your store can stay in business. Like, these are community, like, you are adding value to your community by doing these events, and you shouldn't feel bad about charging something for it. Like, you are providing a service, and that's worth something. So that's the overarching, your work has value answer. But I do think if you are getting the feedback that your events are too expensive, finding those wholesalers will help cut your costs down, or adjusting the, like, can you buy things in bulk and make it a series so that the costs are lower? I think in those situations, getting your costs down is the biggest thing. Also, bring your own beads and stuff. People will do that. So if you're like, these, whatever we needed to bedazzle the book covers cost too much money, have people bring it. Make sure it's communicated very clearly, because, you know, someone will forget, or have them there for sale, you know, whatever you need to do. But it can, let's say, like, I have very rarely come across an event where I was like, no one would pay this much for this in a bookstore. Also, look at how much the homeschooling community in your area is paying for events. I can almost guarantee it's more than what you're charging. Me too. It always makes me feel better whenever I feel guilty about it. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Great. Sounds good. If anyone has specific questions, please feel free.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!